Well, hello, everybody. Angela and I are here to answer your questions again. We'll give you a few remarks about where things are at. I think in the big picture, Trump showed he's a loser this week. Coronavirus wins. Trump loses. He's a loser. And then he got his butt kicked by a bunch of TikTok and K-pop teens on that Tulsa rally. About 6 judges ruled against him. Bunch of generals. A new one came out today calling him a racist. Man, I can't even remember all the bad stuff that happened to him. I did tweet at him. I said, "Are you tired of losing? Do yourself and all of us a favor. Resign." So I think right now that opens up for the Green Party, a real opportunity to roll up a big vote and get our agenda so they can't take us for granted after the election. But speaking of elections, we're still in the Green primary season. It looks like we received enough delegates to win in a first round ballot. But of course, we want to, get the support of those Greens in the primary still going on. And that includes Delaware, Kentucky, Minnesota, and the Women's Black and Latinx caucuses. I may have left a state out there, but go to your respective state and caucus websites and find out how to vote if you haven't. And we'd be honored to have you vote. Meanwhile, we are in full gear now on ballot access. And we're at about 25 states. We got 26 more jurisdictions to go because we want all 50 states and the District of Columbia. So again, every state is different. In some states, we want a victory on Sunday. We want a court. Well, first we appealed to the state of Illinois saying it's against public health recommendations to go out there and get whatever they had to get, 15,000 good signatures, which meant 30,000 physically on the street. So put us on the ballot. We've been on the ballot for president every election since '96. And, the government said no. So we took them to court and we won. And they kind of waited 6 weeks and then they appealed. And we went right to court. And on Sunday, we got a decision. We're back on the ballot in Illinois. And they just, the state didn't have a good argument. But, the Democrats like to whine about the Republicans knocking people off the ballot. And that's true. Voters. But the Democrats knocked the Greens off the ballot. Illinois, for example, that's a Democratic government. Here in New York, they tripled ballot access requirements in a new law passed under the cover of the coronavirus when they passed the state budget. So the Republicans aren't the only ones trying to suppress the vote because we bring new voters to the elections. So in other states, we're doing physical petitioning. We got paid petitioners up in Alaska. They're just about done with that petition. So our campaign's putting a lot of resources into that. And we're close to qualifying for matching funds, which will double all contributions up to $250. And we're going to plow that back into ballot access because over the summer, we got a lot of petitions to do. Sometimes it's electronic, like in New Jersey. And now in Maryland, we got an agreement from the state government there. They'd already collected 5,000 petitions. They need 5,000 good ones, but they're going to get their margin of safety electronically. So that was a victory. So that's an ongoing thing. And we really need people in the states that have yet to qualify. And off the top of my head, I know that's still Oregon, Minnesota, I believe Virginia. There are 5 states. You can go to our website, howiehawkins.us, and look under what tab is that? The Mobilize tab, and I think it says Matching Funds Progress. And you'll see a bar graph, and you can see. But even if your state is qualified, if you haven't contributed up to $250, all the money you contribute up to that amount will be matched when we qualify. So just because you're not in a state trying to qualify, don't hold back. We need this money to get on the ballot. And then the last thing I'll say, and then I'll let Angela share her thoughts, is that ballot access is one big barrier. Getting into the mainstream media narrative is a big barrier. And we made progress on that the last week. I was in Politico. I was in The Hill twice. I was on the Hill Rising podcast this morning. I was just on Australian broadcasting. The last question they asked me is, what would I tell the American mainstream media if I was on? I'd say, we should be on all the time. The Greens are a legitimate point of view. We should be commentators when they bring them in. And then I complimented the Australian Broadcasting Company. I said, you're way ahead of the United States mainstream media. So that's a big battle. And you can help us with that by just asking that question. MSNBC, when are you going to have Howie Hawkins on? When are you going to have Angela Walker on? We want to hear from them. And you can bombard CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and so forth. That's something all of us can do. So I'm going to stop there. And Angela, what do you want to tell people before we answer these questions?
Just thinking, I was just on a live stream before, we started talking with Madeline Hoffman in New Jersey, and just thinking about making sure that folks sign the petitions in New Jersey. That's a big one, not just for us, but definitely for the Madeline Hoffman campaign. And, we talked about the fact that the Green Party is the only party that is talking about the things that we're talking about. Like Siberia hit 100 degrees a couple of days ago. And we are still looking at young people being lynched in this country. I think the newest story was a young person outside of a high school that they found him. And I couldn't go into the story because I don't have the heart to read it. And so just thinking, and then we're facing all of these moratoria on evictions ending. And so what's going to happen to people? There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of things that we have to address right now. There's a lot of urgency, to things that need to be done. And we are honestly the only party that is addressing these things. And I think it's important that people know that.
And Madeline Hoffman's running for U.S. Senate in New Jersey, just so people know. You want to read that one, Angela?
I'm sorry, honey. I was off in the comments. The World Animal. Good evening. I am an undecided voter. I have lived on disability for 3 years now with no end in sight. What provisions, policies, and procedures need to take place to ensure a better quality living for the most disenfranchised? One of the things that we discuss that's in our policy that is popping to mind, especially since I just mentioned the eviction moratoriums on evictions that are ending, and people are very concerned about their housing. Thinking about universal rent controls, and also public housing, guaranteed housing for all, public housing that is inclusive, that is accessible, that is multi. It's not the way that it's stigmatized now, where it's folks who are quote unquote low income. Public housing would be the thing. And this housing instability that we're facing, yes, exactly, Jamie, healthy housing, where we're facing, people are looking at housing instability, wouldn't be a problem under that. But you can elaborate too, Howie.
Well, I think the Economic Bill of Rights that
Yes.
has always been part of our Green New Deal. We just put out a statement. It's on the website under the Issues tab on the Economic Bill of Rights. The 6 rights: a guaranteed job, a guaranteed income, affordable housing, comprehensive health care, lifelong public education, and a secure retirement. And I think for people with disabilities, these give them a secure economic position and access to the things they need. So the income guarantee is a guaranteed income above poverty, and that's built into the tax structure. So if your income is below the poverty line, which we say should be doubled, if you to deal with a realistic basic needs budget, then the government would send you checks instead of you sending them taxes on a progressively scaled basis. The job guarantee ought to have jobs for people with disabilities, so they can work and contribute and feel that they're pulling their weight according to their ability. And I know that's important for a lot of people with disabilities. What's bad right now is that they're taken advantage of and super exploited, and that's got to stop. We got to enforce the Americans with Disabilities Act more than has been done, because there's still a lot of places that are not accessible. Mobility is a big part of living with disabilities, as is independence. And that comes to the public housing. I mean, we're not talking about segregated public housing developments for the disabled and ghettoizing them. We're talking about mixed income developments where disabled people can live with professionals, working class, and low income people, like they do in Europe. In Europe, in a lot of those countries, 20 to 30% of the country's housing is public. You go to Vienna, Austria, 60% is public. And all kinds of people live there, so that the poor and the disabled and ethnic minorities are not segregated. That's the way we've done public housing in this country. So we're talking about doing it differently. Lifelong public education, including accessibility, and then a secure retirement. There, you know, a lot of people on disabled and disability are getting Social Security benefits early, and then when they, you know, become seniors, they get the full benefit. But we're saying that benefit should be doubled because that would bring the income above the poverty line and be a decent, secure retirement. And that can be done. The biggest thing would be to just lift the cap on the payroll tax, or better would be to pay for it through progressive income and wealth taxes, like most countries pay for their, you know, national pension systems. So there's a lot there that will support people with disabilities and everybody. But the thing there is we got to make sure the people with disabilities, special needs and concerns are addressed in all those programs. Perry Frog, hey Howie, how long do you think the modern conservative movement will have such a large following in America? I think the modern conservative movement that's left is the old racist movement, and it's shrinking. I mean, the hardcore is maybe 30% of the country, and a lot of those are white folks that are convinced to blame the people they've climbed over to get to where they are, or used to be able to, and now they're having trouble. So they're scapegoating immigrants and black folks and brown folks, even Indians, and you know, and that's an old story in this country, when in fact they're being exploited by the rich folks. And that's a divide and conquer strategy that I think the young folks are getting wise to. The fact that there's so many white kids out there with Black Lives Matter demonstrations all over the country is a good sign. We've really never seen that before. You know, the urban rebellions, you know, civil rights movement was integrated, you know, when Martin Luther King was leading marches, but it was black led and predominantly black, actually. White folks were a little embarrassed when Bull Connor did some things that got televised. But when it came back up north to desegregate schools, there's a lot of resistance. I think this younger generation has got a different attitude, and that gives me hope.
Yes.
And as far as conservative, the idea that, you know, to me, a conservative is kind of a temperamental thing. It's like, don't touch it. You might make it worse. Just leave it alone. And, you know, progressives are like, we can do better. And you always have that sort of range of people. But the ideological conservatives in this country, I mean, they're not conservative at all. They're radical free marketers. And the market destroys those traditions they supposedly want to uphold. And then they're the racists. I mean, I don't even think we got a legitimate conservative movement in this country. We got a retroactive racist renegades that are dying out. They're older and they're getting defeated. And Trump, I think, was their last gasp. I sure hope so.
Arif Hassan is asking, how do we eradicate AIDS? It's a good question. I think, especially since I've been around since I can remember before it hit. I'm that old. I think the same way that you manage any other disease. Education, making sure that folks are protecting themselves, that, you know, if PrEP is something that is available to you and something that you need, that you have access to those things, which would, of course, when we're talking about our platform, all of these things would come under Medicare for All as a community-controlled national health service. So just making sure that people are still being educated on how the disease is spread, making sure that people have what they need to protect themselves, and, you know, retrovirals, if that's what people need, you know, to keep their counts down, and however that works. And also PrEP as a preventive measure, if that's something that's available to them. I think you treat AIDS like you treat any other disease. And if you want to bring it down, since there is no cure, there is like not a vaccine that I know of. I know there's things that are talked about, but just being careful and just making sure that people are educated and that they're protecting themselves and that they have the means to do those things.
Yeah, I would just add that, HIV drugs are too expensive, too hard to get. These big pharma companies got patents on them. Both parties have protected them. I mean, Al Gore was infamous back in the Clinton administration for insisting in trade deals that big pharma be able to sell those drugs at high cost, which was devastating Africa. And, that's just criminal. So as part of this community controlled national health service, it would include the drug companies. So drugs would be available at cost. So access to healthcare, access to drugs, public health education, sex education in the schools, so people learn how to protect themselves. And, we got speaking of the conservative movement, there's, I guess it's the evangelical Christians that they don't want their children to know how to protect themselves. They got an unrealistic view of what young adults will do. So we need sex education too to prevent infections. And this is, another case where the two governing parties in this country are presiding over a failed state, because we should be a lot further along than we are in preventing AIDS and treating HIV infections.
This is from Howie Hawkins 2020. Andrew from Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany. I was wondering what your thoughts on universal basic income are and your thoughts on discontinuing production of the penny.
Well, when we talk about a guaranteed minimum income above poverty, we're talking about what's sometimes called a basic income grant, or at least a minimum income grant, so that everybody has an income above poverty. And that's really important because, the two parties and a lot of academics say, oh, poverty is such an intractable problem, and then they start figuring out why poor people are poor as if it's their fault. And if you live in a working class neighborhood with a lot of people that are below the poverty line, most of them are working very hard. They're working very hard. They're getting up early in the morning, coming home tired and dirty. And the problem is their wages are too low. So most poor people are poor because they don't have enough money. It's really simple. Now, yes, there are alcoholics. There are people with emotional or mental problems. They need help for those things. And, getting them enough money so they're not poor is not a hard problem to solve. The problem I have with the universal basic income, like Andrew Yang was promoting, is he was giving everybody $1,000 a month, which would barely get them to the current poverty line, which is really half of what a poverty line should be, at a cost of $3.8 trillion a year. That is about 3/4 of all the federal revenues we now get. And why are you giving $1,000 a month to Donald Trump or to Warren Buffett or to Steve Bezos or, a lawyer, a doctor that has plenty of income? They don't need it. So the guaranteed minimum income we're talking about, it'd be about $200 million to get people up to the current poverty line compared to $3.8 trillion that Yang was talking about. So you're not taxing the working class to give money to the Donald Trumps of the world. Now, when we talk about doubling the poverty line, a high estimate is $500 billion a year, 500 billion. And if that's what it takes to end poverty, it's a good investment. As far as stopping production of the penny, I'd never thought about that before. And I think, I never thought about that before. How do you make change? Because all these merchants like to charge you, instead of $3, $2.99. So we still need pennies. I just really haven't thought about that. I don't know what the argument is for or against. Patricia Fichter, how are you planning on taking lobbyists out of politics? You want to start on that one, Angela?
Where do you start? Just thinking about, at least with the fact that we don't take corporate money as a party and as candidates. So where do you need the lobbyists? I mean, and I that's my most simplistic answer to that. But Howie, like, if you want to
Well,
expand on that,
if we have public campaign financing, then
you don't have yes.
lobbyists' money wouldn't talk. That's how lobbyists have influence. The corporate lobbyists, the special interests we're worried about. It's not their arguments so much as their money. And that influences people like Joe Biden. You know, he got a lot of money from the DuPonts and the financial companies in Delaware. And it wasn't the sweet reason of those companies. It was the money they contributed to his political career that moved Biden. Now, we do want lobbyists, citizen lobbyists, even business lobbyists, to make their arguments to legislators to educate them. That's not the problem. The problem is that the lobbyists, they look like dollar signs to those politicians. And then they're not really informing the legislature, they're buying it. So we need public campaign financing. And I think that's how we get the bad side of lobbying out of politics.
Matthew Hilliard, what is your plan for fire season in the West? Our hometown of Paradise, I've heard about that. Paradise burned to the ground in 2018. This is pressing for us.
Well, I would start by saying, as part of our Green New Deal, we have a civilian conservation corps that would be 4 million people strong. Afforestation would be a big part of their mandate. It would be partly to, regrow the forests that have burned down. I think I'm not an expert on fire management, but a lot of these forests depend on regular fires to clear out the underbrush. And I think the way they've been managed is they've allowed a lot of underbrush, which is like kindling, and then the trees go down. Some of these trees only, their seeds are only, I guess, sprouted when there's a fire comes through, at least for some species. So I think, forest management needs to change. But underlying this is climate change.
Yes.
And that's where the whole Green New Deal, Angela mentioned it's over 100 degrees in one of the coldest spots of on Earth in Siberia. And, that's tundra, frozen Earth. And now it's just soggy mush and methane because of decomposition. And that methane is like 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide in heating the atmosphere over the first 20 years it's up there. So this is an environmental catastrophe. And one of the things they're worried about this summer up there is forest fires in Siberia. So instead of a frozen tundra and cold temperatures, you got very hot temperatures. And if it doesn't rain for a while, then they become tender. And they've had big forest fires. They were having big forest fires north of the Arctic Circle up in Scandinavia. I believe it was last year. This is a crisis. And, it's terrible what happened to Paradise there in California. Unfortunately, if we don't reverse what we're doing to the climate, there's going to be a lot more of that. So we need a serious emergency climate action program, or we're going to have more situations like what happened to Paradise.
Andy Messick, please comment on the Equality Act and what you think of it, or if you think it needs to be improved. And thank you for Vote Green 2020. I was ready for you, Andy. I saw that in the comments. We obviously, of course, as a campaign and as individuals, support the Equality Act. We feel like I got sidetracked. We feel like there was a victory that our communities won with the Supreme Court ruling very recently, as far as providing provisions for trans people in the workplace. We know that the Equality Act addresses that. Of course, the Equality Act right now is stalled. One of the biggest important things that was left out of, and you can correct me on this if you want, if I'm leaving it out, but one of the things that was not addressed in the recent ruling was making spaces and places safe for covered in current law to include retail stores, banks, legal services, strengthening existing protections for everybody covered under that. And so that wasn't included in this most recent case, and that's something that we support. That is part of the Equality Act. And for people who don't know, the Equality Act would amend existing civil rights law, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was the focus of this most recent ruling too. The Fair Housing Act, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, Jury Selection and Services Act, and also several laws regarding employment in the federal government. So basically, you're codifying into law protections for trans, LGBT, folks who are gay, gender nonconforming, all of us queer folks, every one of us on the rainbow, folks protected legally from being discriminated against at work and in spaces and places. So I think that the Equality Act, as it's written, I think it's a little more complete than what was recently passed. But anything that protects trans and gender nonconforming and all of us folks on the LGBTQIA rainbow to be able to work safely and not be discriminated against at work, those things support. Howie, you can.
Well, I think you got it. It creates a new class of people. All federal anti-discrimination and civil rights laws would now include everybody in the LGBTQIA spectrum as protected people. And so they'd be able to, sue against discrimination and exclusion. And it's passed the House, it's stalled in the Senate. But given that this Supreme Court, upheld the employment part of that, maybe the Republicans should smell the coffee and just get on board and let this thing go. But if they don't, I don't know if they're going to be there after November. They have pretty much tied themselves to Donald Trump, and he's dropping like an anchor. Ben Livingston, how will your light rail plan and more broadly public transportation plan work? Well, that's part of the eco-socialist Green New Deal we're talking about. In the transportation sector, we want a public transportation corporation to take over all the rail systems, or at least fund local public rail systems like the Metropolitan Transit Authority down in New York. And we want to rebuild light rails, trolley systems like every city and town in this country had between the 1890s and the 1930s. That, if we did it 100 years ago, we can do it again. We just need to put the money in. We need to build high-speed bullet trains between our cities to reduce the need for air traffic for short and intermediate range trips. And then we need to rebuild our freight rail systems so that they're running on their own tracks, not the same as passenger trains. Right now, Amtrak has to stop for coal trains. It's ridiculous. And and all this should be electrified so it can be powered by clean, renewable sources. And now would be a good time to do it with their stock price so low, integrate the airline system into that. So we have, like we did until the Carter administration, we basically had public planning of the airline routes for efficiency. And we need to do that too, and integrate them with the rail transportation. And then get a lot of the freight off the roads and onto the rails. It can be moved much more, with much less environmental damage and much more easily by clean energy. So those are some of the things we do. And the way we do it is public enterprise. You leave it to the private rail corporations, and, their thing is maximizing profit in the next quarter. CSX freight rail, we have accidents in New York State. I don't know what it is in other states, almost every week on their freight rails. And then we had a situation where they had one-man trains up there in Canada, and that town got blown up because the brake wasn't set right by the one guy working the train, and it rolled down the hill, and what was in the cargo included, I guess, oil and gas, exploded. It blew up this town up there in Quebec. That's what happens when you have a for-profit rail system. And so we would just say, let's make that a public utility that operates at cost for public benefit.
Ian wants to know, what are Howie's positions on gun control? Well, I believe Howie.
I like to talk about gun safety. I think we can work within the framework of the Heller decision, which said you have a right to firearms, but the public has a right to reasonable regulations in the interest of public safety. So my position is pistols, rifles, shotguns are fine as long as you're law abiding. We need to close a lot of the loopholes where people can get guns, the background check loopholes, the private market exchanges that can get those guns in the wrong hands, and those kinds of gun controls. But I want us to buy back assault weapons. I'm a former Marine. That M16 I had has no place in the street. It's bad enough out there. I just found out this afternoon somebody shot a bullet in the back of my car, hit the gas tank. I got a big repair coming. It's crazy out here. And I don't know what kind of weapon that was, but while I believe people ought to have gun rights, we have a gun shooting and killing epidemic, from the suicides to the intentional murders to the accidental deaths. It is off the charts compared to other countries. And we got to get a handle on that. But so I'm for gun safety, not for getting rid of the guns by any means. But, I think people should have them if they think they need them for self-defense and for hunting and sports shooting. That's fine. But assault rifles, no, that's a weapon of war. Don't put that on the street. Somebody who wants to do harm can do too much harm too fast before they're stopped. So let's just buy them back. Evan Frazier, can you discuss how you can use foreign policy to advance a progressive mission for the U.S., not just as a nation, but as an international power? And you want to start with that, Angela? Or you want me?
Discuss how you can use foreign policy to advance a progressive mission. I think, and maybe this is, my take on it, but diplomacy. Just being diplomatic and not coming to countries the way that the United States has traditionally done it, as basically going to tell you how to manage your resources. We're coming to take things from you, things like that. I think that diplomacy and respect and compassion are what's needed. But you can get in, because it's your thing, you get into the nuts and bolts of foreign policy.
Well, I think we can do a lot more with public diplomacy. In other words, if another country is doing something wrong, violating human rights, not democratic, let's mobilize world public opinion. And that, countries don't want to be shamed. They want to have good relations for economic reasons. So we have leverage there. I think the U.S., with all its resources, can be the world's humanitarian superpower and help people make friends instead of enemies. Right? What we do now is we send in the military for every problem. And in fact, it's more than just trying to help. We're trying to control. Coups in Latin America, Honduras, Haiti, Bolivia, even legal so-called constitutional coups like in Brazil. Our Department of Justice was helping them do those maneuvers that got the Workers' Party out and got Bolsonaro, the Brazilian version of Trump, in there. That was very much intentional to have repressive governments keep working people down so our corporations can go in there and exploit cheap labor, get resources for cheap, not have to deal with environmental regulations. That is against the interests of the people of the United States as well as the people of the countries that were impressing by that imperialist foreign policy. So I think, we should. The other thing I'll say is we can't do effective public diplomacy and talk about human rights till we clean up our own act. We got 4% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prisoners. We've built the largest prison system in world history. Bigger than the Russian Gulag, bigger than the, past system in South Africa, bigger than what China's got right now. biggest prison system in the world right here. So if we're going to be effective as public diplomacy and, you know, preaching about human rights and democracy, I mean, we're suppressing the vote here. This is the country where it's hardest to get on the ballot of any electoral democracy in the world. So, you know, the first thing we can do, and this goes back to Thomas Paine, you know, in the Enlightenment and the Democratic Revolution we had here, and then he went to France, he's involved in that. But his main thing was set a good example in the people who want to be part of that, you know, be part of a real democracy. But first, we got to set that example because we're falling way short of it. Chris Gibbons, how does one go about convincing people that a vote for Howie is not a vote for Trump? I don't need convincing, but any mention of voting third party over Biden just turns into a useless dialogue. Thanks. You must have been talking to Democrats, particularly Democratic hacks. I mean, let's first just talk about simple logic. You know, you got a Trump column, you got a Biden column, you got a Hawkins-Walker column. A vote in our column is a vote for Hawkins-Walker. It's not a vote for Trump. So let's just be logical, first of all. Second of all, we know from like Jill Stein in 2016, 61% of the voters who voted for her, we know that from exit polling, would have stayed home. They wouldn't have voted for Trump or Clinton. So the idea that our votes would go to Biden in order to defeat Trump is a false assumption. Sure, there's some, but most of them, we bring new voters out. We bring out the people that don't like either of the two major parties because they look at them and they see people that don't really know what their problems are or care about them. 100 million people didn't vote in 2016. That's who we're bringing out. That's who we're targeting. That is the people that mostly don't vote, mostly working class, people of color, young people. That's the future of the Green Party if we're going to become a major party and force in American politics. So, you know, you're not going to convince the Democratic hacks because they're not being logical. They are just trying to scare people. But, you know, the arguments to vote for us is make your vote count. You know, when you vote for us, you're voting for Medicare for all. You're voting for a Green New Deal. You're voting for an economic bill of rights. You vote for Biden, you're voting against those things. If you're for those things and you vote for Biden, you know, you're disappearing yourself. If you're a Sanders progressive and you vote for Biden, you basically, nobody knows that. You're lost in the sauce. You're just voting with that, you know, fiscal hawk and war hawk named Joe Biden. You vote for the Green Party, everybody knows what we stand for. That vote means something. So I think you should tell people don't waste your vote on a Democrat or Republican. Vote for what you want and vote Green Party.
That's pretty much my answer. Somebody asked me that earlier, and it's like, you know, in this year with all of these things that are happening, you have a pandemic, you have an uprising, you have like climate change laid bare in so many different places. Stand on what you believe. I mean, at this point, why are you voting for someone who is not going to give you what you want and has said that they are not interested? Biden is talking, you know, the people in the streets are saying defund the police. Biden is saying give more money to the police. I mean, come on. I mean, anyway, like I said, and like Howie said, if you believe in you have a certain ideology, there's things in this platform that you believe in, stand on that. And we realize that, you know, there's a lot of justified fear with this individual who is currently occupying the White House. We get that. But at some point, you're going to have to be brave enough to stand on what actually means something to you. Robert Austin. Hey, Robert. Should cops be allowed to use tasers as a form of force? We have a problem with police officers using force, period. That's how we got here. You have a lot of folks, and then you have folks having tasers, as in the case, I'm thinking of Oscar Grant, where the officer said she's reaching for her taser and she shot him and he died. So, I mean, I think that we really have to go to the heart of what is being discussed with defund the police and resourcing them. So we are not sending police armed with guns and tasers out to things that don't require them. You know, what happened to Mr. Brooks in Atlanta, that didn't need a cop. That needed, you know, somebody, a counselor. We didn't need to do that. So we need to reappropriate funds and consider what we are authorizing police to do. And Howie, I know you can elaborate on that too.
Well, yeah. I mean, sometimes you got a violent individual and that needs to come into custody, and you got to use some kind of force. I'm no expert on tactics. I mean, what I learned in the Marines is, frankly, how to kill people and blow stuff up, not how to, you know, detain somebody. That's a different. I just don't know the tactics, so I really can't speak to tasers as opposed to another method. But my first thought is, well, maybe better a taser than a pistol. If you can, you know, incapacitate somebody more safely than shooting them with a bullet, you know, maybe that's a less lethal method. But I would leave that to people who are more expert in that field than me.
Which one is that, you or me?
Well, I can. I'm not sure I can pronounce the name correctly.
Gaelic.
Yeah, Riondon Dabid or Dalbid. Anyway, do you support Irish unity? Well, I mean, my first thought, we're talking about Northern Ireland and the nation of Ireland. And I think that's up to the people living there. Whatever they decide, I hope it's peaceful. And it's not for me to tell other people, you know, whether to unite or remain separate. I believe in self-determination and democratic processes. So I don't think it's the business of the United States either to, you know, push a particular outcome that might be against the will of the people living there. So that's my first thought on that.
I concur. Hey, Yadira. How do we get religion out of politics? Lord have mercy. Especially in regards to women's reproductive rights and abortion. And in thinking about people who are able to be pregnant, there is no place in that separation of church and state. I think we have to work a little harder to emphasize that religion has no place in deciding a person's bodily autonomy, and that no one has the right to use religion in a way that prevents people from making choices for their bodies that are good for them. And as far as us as a campaign removing religion from politics, I'm a heathen. So I mean, I don't think religion figures in this platform at all. We respect people's right, and as a party, we respect people's right to practice or not practice the religion of their choice. We do not support people using religion as a cudgel to abuse other people. And Howie, I'm sure you can speak on it more than that.
Well, the way to get religion out of politics is to ensure strict separation of church and state. And the policies of a particular religion, not just Christian churches, but any religion, should not be the basis on which laws are made. And that separation is what guarantees not just religious freedom, but freedom of thought, which is probably the most fundamental part of the First Amendment. So those religious people that try to impose a particular view of religion on public policy, that's a violation of church and state, and that's a big problem. And we do have, you know, fundamentalist Christians in this country who, like the Taliban in Afghanistan, want to impose a particular religious view that not that many people hold on everybody else, and that's wrong. So you got to keep it out of the state, out of policy and law, and then oppose it in politics, you know? You can believe what you want, but you can't impose that on the rest of us.
And just to, because I noticed this over here in the chat, a statement that, organizations like Planned Parenthood harm pregnant people and murder children, that it has nothing to do with religion. If you've never been a patient at Planned Parenthood, which I have, because I've spent years and years without health insurance, then leave it alone. And that's where I'm gonna leave that. It is a person's right, and that person, between that person and their doctor, whatever their bodily autonomy, they have the right to decide what is best for their body. If you are not that person, it is not your decision.
PMC Gloom. What is your plan for providing clean drinking water for Flint, Michigan? The damn Green New Deal. We need to invest in our cities and get this stuff done soon. I mean, people talk about defunding the police. Yeah, you can take the whole police budget and put in the clean water in Flint, and it's not going to do what needs to be done there. It's not going to deal with everybody that needs homes. We need a major federal investment in bringing these communities up that have been segregated, discriminated against, and exploited for generations. And what happened to Flint was a crime because the state government, the Republicans in power in Michigan, decided Flint was in fiscal trouble, so they're going to put in a manager, a state manager that the people of Flint didn't elect. And he's the one that made the bonehead decision, instead of taking the clean water they had, to go to this river, which corroded the pipes and created the lead problem. And they still haven't cleaned it up, and it's been years. So, this is, when I talk about a failed state under the governance of both parties, that's what I'm talking about. So we need a Green New Deal that, not only converts all our production systems to clean energy, but also rebuilds our urban structures. And that's part of it, because the built environment produces the way we live, the streets we walk on, the water we drink, the air we breathe, the food we eat. And that all has to be part of redoing our economy so it's ecologically sustainable. And it's just criminal that people in Flint, are still having to, you can't drink out of their faucets. And, people say the Democrats are the lesser evil. What the hell was Obama doing there saying we're drinking the water?
I was waiting on you to say that.
Wonder why we get angry? Trump is terrible, no doubt. But when people say, oh, we're privileged if we're going to vote for a third party. No, we can't deal with the Democrats any more than the Republicans. We need change. And it's only people in privileged positions like these professors that, say, oh, only the privileged can afford to vote for a third party. No, it's the privileged that can only afford the Democrats. We need a change.
Come on. Noe Saldana. Hey, honey. Hey, Howie and Angela. Do you guys agree that we should remove our military coup trying to take over Venezuela? Or in other words, what are your thoughts, our illegal foreign intervention across the globe? Another thing about religion and politics. Free Palestine. Well, we both believe that the United States has no business meddling in, and I just had this discussion with Madeline, meddling with Venezuela. They were messing with the president before Maduro. They've been messing with Maduro since he took over. We have no business undermining, as a country, we have no business undermining the Venezuelan government, the will of the Venezuelan people. And we do not stand with American, what they call intervention, what we call invasion, and meddling in sovereign nations. And Howie, I'm pitching it to you.
Well, yeah, we should lift the sanctions and help them deal with the coronavirus crisis. They have an energy crisis going on. And one way, people complain about governments being repressive. Well, when they're under attack, they tend to, tighten things up. And we got sanctions against Venezuela. We've picked a president for him named Juan Guaido, who the Venezuelan people didn't pick. And then they have him in the balcony, the gallery at the State of the Union address in Congress. And Trump gives him props And every damn Democrat stood up and gave him a standing applause along with the Republicans. You know, there's a very small number. I can think of one Republican and a handful of Democrats that opposed the bipartisan policy of overthrowing the government of Venezuela. That's what we got to stop. What Venezuela is up to the Venezuelan people. And what we should do is help them deal with, you know, they've got some real problems there economically and now with this coronavirus. And then, you know, Cuba, which has a great medical system, tries to help them. And so, you know, we say that's a crime to provide medical services to people that need it. Oh, man. So, yeah, that's not what our policy should be. And that's why we can't afford the Democrats or the Republicans. You know, they one bipartisan policy is imperialism. And Venezuela's sitting on all these oil reserves, which shouldn't be burned anyway, and a lot of them are tar sands like they have up in Alberta. That stuff should stay in the ground. But that's not why we're looking at Venezuela. We're looking at it so the oil companies can go in there and make a lot of money and heat the damn planet up. So hands off Venezuela. Leah in Hialeah, Florida. Have you considered changing funding for education so that it is need-based rather than based on the resources of individual communities so that inequality is not perpetuated? Yes, we just in our Economic Bill of Rights said we want to see the federal government fund public education instead of relying on local property taxes, which are unevenly distributed, leading to unequal funding for different school districts. Let's just fund it through the progressive federal and wealth taxes we propose and have you can do it on a per capita basis, and then those districts where they need extra help, need-based. They need community schools because the schools need to be a place where people get all their social services. Just because these communities are poor, they don't have resources like, you know, this community here where my car got a bullet in it has no grocery stores. I got to drive 11 miles to get to a real grocery store. And that's true in a lot of urban centers. So the school becomes a place where people can get good meals in a community school. So per capita, then with extra money for those communities that really need extra help.
Tuesday Watkins. If another pandemic occurs in the future, hope not, God forbid, would you create UBI for all Americans and would it be monthly? Absolutely. A guaranteed basic income is already not only in our campaign platform overall, but it is also in the COVID relief part of our platform as well. And another pandemic occurs in the future. I'm thinking of the fact that this pandemic now hasn't gone anywhere. People want to go back to some sort of normalcy, and I respect that, but this virus has not left. And places like South Carolina, where I live, are seeing exponential numbers, you know, rises in numbers of infections. So we're still dealing with a pandemic. This one has not gone anywhere, and people need a guaranteed basic income right now. And yes, it would be paid monthly. Under COVID relief, it would be $2,000 a month per adult in the country, every adult in the country, $500 per month for every child. And going forward, there would be a guaranteed basic income above poverty for everyone. And how you can have at it.
Well, yeah, the UBI is everybody gets the same check. And I think in this emergency, we got to do that. We don't have time to have people file their tax returns and then, come up with a scale of how we get people money, double the poverty rate. That's a process. It needs legislation. Right now, people need cash, especially as we come to the end of July and the extra unemployment benefits run out. So I'm for that for the interim, just because it can be implemented very quickly. I mean, we did it with the $1,200 checks, not perfectly, but a lot of people finally got theirs, but it wasn't enough. And in this emergency, I mean, what the unemployment rate is, according to National Jobs for All Coalition, over 25%, greater than during the Great Depression. Figures I've seen is 36 to 46 million people that filed for unemployment benefits since, I guess March. I mean, this is a real crisis. And if people don't have cash, then rents don't get paid, mortgages don't get paid, utility bills don't get paid. And then you start having domino effect of bankruptcies. And as businesses go out of business, people lose their jobs, less people have income. It's a downward spiral into a depression. So this is needed for emergency. But in the long run, it should be what we call the income guarantee, the guaranteed income above poverty. And if you go to our Economic Bill of Rights and look at the discussion of the guaranteed income, we note that this is something that wasn't in Roosevelt's original Economic Bill of Rights. He did talk about helping people with disabilities, older people, sick people, but it wasn't universal. This is something that the civil rights movement raised. And we have a quote from King in his last book saying, it's the quickest way to end poverty. And it was part of their demands from the March on Washington and for Jobs and Freedom in 1963, right through to the Poor People's Campaign in 1968. And, you know, since Roosevelt, Democratic presidents have had a majority in both houses of Congress, at least for 1 2-year House term. And none of these rights have been secured when the Democrats were in power. Now, tell me again why we're supposed to support the Democrats as a lesser evil when working class life expectancies are declining in this country. You know, we can't afford these people anymore. We need change.
Kevin McDonald wants to know, what is your plan for dealing with the U.S. prison system?
Well, I'll start by saying all the drug prisoners, you know, in there for personal use, that's 45%. Well, not 45% of federal drug prisoners are related to drug crimes. But everybody who's in there for personal use, and usually that's marijuana, they should be released and their records expunged. People in there for harder drugs, instead of sending them to prison, we should be giving them the opportunity to get treatment for their addictions. We need to get a lot of people out of prison because of this COVID crisis. It's just like a petri dish for getting people sick and dying. There are political prisoners in there. So I just saw an article, Reality Winner. You know, she released a half-page summary of intelligence about Russian interference in the election in 2016. In the Trump administration, threw the book at her. She's in there for, I think, 5 years in a federal prison. You know, Eugene Debs only served 2.5 years, and he was pardoned by a president after World War I was over for being against the war under the Espionage Act. I mean, we're worse than we were back then, and that was a pretty bad time. You know, that's a lot of bad things happened in the post-World War I period. Race riots, which basically meant white mob riots against black people. Tulsa was one of those. Real repression against the labor movement, against the socialist movement. But even then, you know, Debs was out in 2.5 years. Reality Winner, minor, you know, disclosure, is sitting there, you know, subject to COVID. So political prisoners, all the people in the immigration detention centers, you know, they should be released, and we should help them find a place so they can go through the process. Although for us, we just give them all status and, you know, let them settle in and contribute to our society. So I think the way what you do with the prison system is start dismantling it. Release the prisoners, a lot of them that can be released. I mean, some of them are dangerous, need to be separated, but it's a small fraction. We're just off the charts compared to other countries in the number of people we in prison. And, you know, it's a political reason. I can't remember the quote exactly, but the war on drugs, it was Haldeman, who was one of Nixon's aides, and said, you know, this was code for going after black people to mobilize white resentment. And the war on drugs was the way they did it. And it's been a war on people of color now for nearly 50 years. And that's got to stop. So a lot of people should come out of prison. And so I think the way you do it is release the prisoners, a lot of them, and start dismantling these facilities, or convert them, if they're convertible, into something useful. Wow, we've been here an hour already.
We have.
We're not getting fed any more questions. So do you have any last thoughts, Angela?
Yes, I actually, and I think people don't know, but I think, usually I'm a lot more smooth about it. I read the chat, and first thing that I need to say is that if you have a platform, you have a plan, you have budgets to back these things up, you don't have to rig an election. So I'm just going to say that. Second of all, if you are interested, if you are here because you are interested in policy, if you are interested in platform, if you are interested in ways of moving this country forward in a way that neither one of the two parties that are currently in power are going to do, then you're in the right place. If I did not believe in this platform or in this party with my whole heart, I wouldn't be here. And so I need to get that out of the way. Let's just get it said. I'm not here for the drama. We're not interested in it. If you are interested in what we are doing to help move things forward, get the green name out there in a good way so people know who we are. There are young people, young Black folks in communities in the hood that are now talking about socialism because of us. We have momentum. We don't have time for the foolishness. We don't have time for the drama. If you here to work, let's get it done. And that's all I'm gonna leave it with.
Well, I've just pretty much ignored all that nonsense and campaigned positively on our program. I'm gonna continue to do that. If we organized everybody on the left, we'd still be tiny. We gotta go out and organize the people, and I'm interested in working with people that are serious about organizing, not coming in and tearing things down.
Yes.
So that's the way this campaign is going to be. I think we're doing a good job so far, but we got a big job ahead of us because, this little sniping from the side is nothing compared to what we're going to get from the Democrats and some of the corporate media. They got a lot more resources and power to smear us and try to crush us. So this has just got us ready. And so I want to finish on a positive note. And I think, let's just think about the fact that for a month, people have been out on the streets saying an end to police brutality and racism. And this is a more diverse, broad-based movement, particularly among the young people. It's a hopeful harbinger for the future. And so let's ride that wave into a more positive situation than we're now in. And I assume we're going to be back here next Wednesday. So good to see you. Well, I didn't see you. I'm talking at me and Angela on the screen, but it was nice to be able to communicate with you. And have a good evening.
Y'all take care.